Well, I just want to welcome you again to our South Campus of Fellowship Bible Church. And just being honest with you, I can't. There's some that I haven't seen in a while that are here today, and it just because of different things of life. But I need you to know that as a pastor, man, that blesses my heart. And a lot of times when you do what Nathan and I get this chance to do, sometimes life is not always fair. Life is not always easy. At times, it can even be found difficult. And so, I want to encourage you today. We're in between series. We just finished a series on covenant, and then next week we'll start our new series on marriage. So please come back for that. We're going to do a several week series on marriage and the different kind of avenue that we're going on with that. It's pretty exciting. It's not just coming and being a part of a marriage conference, and so don't just get freaked out about that, but it's going to be this idea of when we look at how Christ loves his church, what that looks like for us, and so and how that compares to what we see in marriage. So please come back and be with us for that series. But I enjoy when I get the opportunity to kind of have a time to speak in between series, because usually I have no clue what I'm going to talk about. It's not said, it's not planned ahead. And so I had a sermon planned for today. And as of Thursday, it all changed. And so that's what God does sometimes. And so when I thought about this opportunity, I said, okay, Lord, what is it that you want your people to hear? And then there's things that start going on in my own life that God starts to reveal himself even more and more clearly to me. It's been a difficult week, if you will. Just been in different conversations, and through those difficult and different conversations, it's very easy to allow the enemy. That allows the enemy to lie to you, to deceive you, to speak false truths to you. That if you're not careful, you'll easily believe it. You'll easily believe it. I had just some difficult conversations, and conversations that get you thinking, that get you wondering, that get you questioning. Then it gets thrown upon you that you're asked to do a funeral that you weren't expecting to do. And it's not just a normal funeral, but it's a funeral that is for a young man whose life was taken before you or I would ever think it should be taken. And then how it was taken, it just is tragic. And have to come into a situation where you're not planning on doing that kind of a funeral and having to give that kind of funeral. And having to walk into that funeral knowing that you need to give hope to those who are involved. And yet you find in yourself at times it's hard for you to find hope. So just wrestling with that. And so I said, God, I have no clue. I was thinking I was going to preach on something totally different Sunday. I have no clue. You're changing my whole agenda. And he brought me back to, there were some difficult conversations that I was having, and we all have them. And we all have difficult people in our lives at times. If you're alive and have a pulse in here, maybe you've experienced difficult people in your life. And usually I want to be that person that tries to solve and fix and mend everything. And yet God this week, during what I was going through, said, I want you to make a list. And I want you to place those individuals on a list. And I want you from this point forward for you to give those individuals to me. You love them. You show them godly kindness. You pray for them. But you give them to me. I said, okay. I heard it loud and clear. Then the enemy was bothering with my thoughts about just different things that I would like to see happen, not only within our church body, but just for the south part of Jackson. And the enemy starts making me wrestle with those thoughts. And I'm praying, and I'm not, and I'm wondering, are my prayers being heard? Have you ever been there? And you're praying, you're like, are they being heard? And I'm traveling up north, and we're going to be putting a billboard out south advertising that we're here, because a lot of people still don't know that we're here. And so since I've been doing that, I've been looking at a lot of billboards. So I don't normally look at them, and I was driving, and I stopped at a stoplight, about to turn where you would go to Lifeway, and I catch that electronic billboard. And as I looked up, these were the words that I saw on the screen. I hear your prayers. Trust me. And I was like, are you for real? I was like, okay. I'm getting these messages, God. Okay, I'm getting it. But, sometimes I'm still cynical and I'm still skeptic, just being honest. So I ended up having to go back to Jackson up north the next day. And I'm like, I'm just curious. Was that just a one time, I just so happened to be driving through and it just happened to be on so I stopped at the stoplight again. And I didn't want to look. But I looked. And I swear to you, nothing changed. I looked up on the screen, said, I am still listening. And I said, okay, all right. So I know what you want me to share. There was a time in my life when we were here working with the Fellowship of Christian Athletes. The opportunity came up for me to go to the University of Mississippi to be on the football staff there as the director of character development, what you would call as a football chaplain. It was my dream. It's what I desired to do. But yet within FCA, you're supposed to raise your financial support. So there was a financial budget that was given to me that was astronomical to me. And in that moment, I only had about a fifth of it raised. And I was supposed to report like within 2 weeks. And I remember being in my office. I remember sitting there praying and saying, okay, Lord, just show me something in your word. And I was studying the different kings of Judah during that time. And he brought me to a guy named Hezekiah. Now, if your life was dependent upon how much you could defend or tell me about Hezekiah, how many of you would be in trouble right now? Yeah, lots of us, right? I like to joke at times. I didn't do it with you today, but I used to like to joke and tell people to turn to the book of Hezekiah in your Bible and just watch people just flip through and just get stumped. I just can't find it. It's not in the front. Where is it at? Because it sounds like it would be a book, but it's actually a king. And he was a king of the southern tribe of Judah. What you need to understand about Hezekiah is Hezekiah is a guy that there's very few men that this was said about in the Bible, that he did what was right in the sight of God. He did what was right. Because so many of the kings of Israel, especially the northern tribes, they were all terrible. The southern tribe, there was 8 that we know for sure were faithful. Some will argue 9 out of 18. So about 50%. He was one of them. Hezekiah was a guy that when he came into to this position of being king of the southern tribe, the Bible records several acts of faithfulness that he did. He started out by cleansing the temple. The temple had not been used. The king before him was not a good king, and so the temple just kind of was a mess. He comes in and cleanses the temple. Not only he cleanses the temple, he establishes worship. The people of Israel would worship, and the temple was their place of worship, and they had stopped worshiping, so he reestablished it. He reinstated the Passover, which was a ceremony that would remind Israel that when they were in bondage to Egypt and the death angel passed over them, they were delivered. They had a ceremony, a celebration of that, a remembrance of that, so they would not forget God's deliverance. Well, they stopped the Passover. Well, he started it back again. He organized all the priests and all the Levites and got everybody together, following in full obedience to God. So things were going great. He was doing amazing things for God. Is it possible for you and I to be allowed with God's grace to do amazing things for the Lord and yet life still show up? And life not be easy? And us have moments of despair or distress? like I experienced this past week? Yes. Hezekiah just had all these great things established. Things were going great. And then we find out 14 years later, 14 years have passed, and there's a people group known as the Assyrians. And the Assyrians have already taken over and destroyed the northern kingdom. And guess what? They're now on the doorsteps of Jerusalem where Hezekiah is. And they wiped out everybody around Hezekiah. And so they are going to come in. The king Sennacherib sends a letter saying, we are going to destroy you. Hezekiah's response is, oh, we really haven't done anything wrong, but what is it that I can give you to stop you coming to destroy us? The king says, well, you can give us this certain amount of silver and this certain amount of gold. Well, Hezekiah goes and gives all that they have. Even to the point that it says that he stripped the door frames that were out, had gold on the door frames. He stripped it to send it. Thinking, well, if I pay this guy off, if I solve my problem myself, it will all go away. Only to find out that all he does is send his henchmen with a large army to come and attack Jerusalem. Hezekiah's self-fix didn't solve his problem. You hear that very clearly today. He had an issue. He had a problem. He and of himself tried to fix it, and it didn't work. Maybe that's true of you. Well, what ends up happening is there's this guy that comes, and in this moment, Hezekiah, the only thing he could think to do is to go to the people and say, God's going to deliver us. I don't know how, but he's going to deliver us. He's in a time of desperation. And he's even kind of questioning, well, I'm hoping that God's going to deliver us. Because these are the things that are being said to him. The leader of this army says, and I'm in Isaiah 36, because he was the prophet that was writing during this time, but our passage is really going to be chapter 37, 14 and following. But if you want to follow along, I'm in 36 at this moment. But I just want to paint you the picture of what's going on with Hezekiah. This king sends his henchmen, right? His ringleader. And his ringleader is making sure that everybody on the walls, everybody that would have been defending the city of Jerusalem, hears what he has to say. And he says, don't let Hezekiah deceive you. This is in verse 14 of chapter 36. For he will not be able to deliver you. Do not let Hezekiah make you trust the Lord by saying the Lord will surely deliver us. Verse 16, do not listen to Hezekiah, for thus says the king of Assyria, make your peace with me and come out to me. Then each one of you will eat of his own vine, of his own fig tree. Each one of you will drink of the water of his own cistern, until I come and take you away to a land that you're like your own land, a land of grain and wine, bread and vineyards. Beware lest Hezekiah mislead you by saying the Lord will deliver us. Has any of the gods of the nations delivered his land out of the hand of the king of Assyria? So here's Hezekiah. He's in a predicament. He has just found out that this massive army is coming to destroy him. He tries to solve it himself, and it doesn't work. So then he tries to go to the people and tries to encourage them the best he can. And now you've got an individual who at the point of where they can hear him is challenging them, saying, don't listen to Hezekiah. He is lying to you. He tells you that your God is going to save you. And I'm sitting there saying, we have destroyed every other nation around here. And their gods were no match. So why do you think you're any different? Instead, how about you come to our side? Right? Isn't the enemy always good at painting a picture that the other side is always a blessing? The other side of the fence is always, the grass is greener on the other side of the fence. You've probably heard that before. I like to add, but that grass still has to be mowed. So it's not always the best, but he pictures it as it's something great. Don't listen to Hezekiah. So now you can imagine what Hezekiah is thinking now. My pep talk hasn't really worked. I'm hoping it's working. They haven't left me yet. And so in chapter 37, before we get to our passage, some other things are said to Hezekiah. His leadership comes to him and they say in verse 3 of 37, this day is a day of distress. This is a day of rebuke, of disgrace. Verse 4, it says, it may be that the Lord your God will hear the words. So they're saying, maybe God will hear the words of this guy who's coming and saying all these things. Maybe God will hear it. The king of Assyria has sent to mock the living God and will rebuke the words that the Lord your God has heard. Therefore, lift up your prayer for the remnant that is left. And so Hezekiah is in a low place. His leaders come to him, but his leaders still acknowledge the truth that maybe if we pray, maybe if we seek his face, he will hear and he will protect the remnant. But again, here's this guy that's representing Assyria right now. He comes and in verse 10 says, thus you shall speak to Hezekiah, king of Judah, do not let your God in whom you trust deceive you by promising that Jerusalem will not be given into the hand of the king of Assyria. Verse 12, have the gods of the nations delivered them? The nations that my fathers destroyed? So now is he challenging Hezekiah? He's challenging Hezekiah's God. Do you understand that the enemy will not only challenge you, but he will challenge your God? The one and only God, if you've placed your faith in Jesus Christ. And that is what's going on. But yet we read earlier that everything was going great for Hezekiah. Reform was happening. God was honoring his faithfulness. And yet he finds himself in a place of despair, of distress. You ever been there? For him, there was a war that was coming. For you, it may be a broken marriage. It may be the loss of a job and I hadn't found one yet. Maybe I've got someone in my family who's sick. They're not doing well. It doesn't seem like they're going to make it. You may have known the family that lost a young man this past week because he took his life. And life is just kicking you, if you will, in the gut. And yet you're being told and you're being challenged to be faithful. And yet it's hard to be faithful when it seems like everything else around me is falling apart. Well, what does Hezekiah do? Verse 14 and following is where we're going to be, 14 through 20. It says, Hezekiah received the letter from the hand of the messengers, and he read it. So all this that was said was written in a letter, and it was given to Hezekiah, and he's starting to read it now. And so he goes up to the house of the Lord, because at this point, when you've tried all that you can offer to solve your problem, you get to that moment where you're the lowest at your lowest moment, and your only option is to look up. And that's where Hezekiah has found himself. So he goes to the house of the Lord, the place of worship that he had reestablished. And what does he do with this letter? He spread it before the Lord. In verse 15, and Hezekiah prayed to the Lord. So he takes this letter that has this difficulty, that has this distress, that has these things on it that seem that are not going to be possible outside of God's help, and he lays it before God and he prays. And when I found myself deciding to go to Ole Miss, God brought me to this passage and had all these concerns. And God said, John, write them down. Lay them before me. Number one was that my wife, we homeschool. She was involved in a great homeschool community here, would find that in Oxford. Number two was that my children would adapt real well, and they would meet friends, and they would be able to get it reestablished. And number three on that list was the idea that my mom, because we were going to have to go before, was going to have to be by herself, that God would find and provide a way to take care of her since we couldn't be able to do that. And number four, that I would be fully funded by August. And up to this point, I was feeling pretty confident. He was going to take care of my wife. He was going to take care of my kids. He was going to take care of um, um, the whole opportunity that we were, I was good. And then it got to the point of a budget that was financially, to me, crazy that I was going to have to raise by myself. And I literally wrote on there that God would meet our needs by August. And then on this sheet, I can show it to you. It shows a line drawn through August and the word October written up over here in the corner. And God was like, man, you just don't trust me, man. You don't trust that if I'm calling you, that I'll provide for you. So I scribbled through the October and wrote back August. The last one was that our house would sell. We had a house for sale here, that our house would sell. I'm going to get back to this list later on. But that was my list. And I laid it before God. Verse 15, it says, Hezekiah prayed to the Lord. And then what does he pray? He says, O Lord of hosts, God of Israel, enthroned above the cherubim, you are the God, you alone, of all the kingdoms of the earth. You have made heaven and earth. So what's the first thing Hezekiah does? He goes and he prays, but in his prayer, what does he do in his time of distress, his time of struggle, whatever that is that you're going through? What can I challenge you as I challenge myself to do? He doesn't just go and pray. He goes and acknowledges God's greatness in the midst of his situation. I did a sermon not too long ago up at our North Campus, and some of you maybe were there. Some of you maybe had listened to it, but pretty much the summary of the sermon was, why worry about that which you can't control? Instead, worship the one who is in control. Because at the end of the day, we worry about so many things that are out of our control. In this moment, the king of Assyria coming was out of Hezekiah's control. He was coming. So why spend time worrying about that which he can't control? Instead, Hezekiah chose to worship the one who is ultimately in control. And in your life, whatever struggle you're going through, whatever it is that you need to make a list of, which I would encourage you to do and lay it before God, understand that instead of worrying about those things, give them over to the Lord. That's what the Lord told me. All those names that I've written down, quit worrying about them. You can't control it. Worship me. Why? Because I'm in control. And I was God a long time before I even created you, John. And after you're gone, I'll still be God. That's what he's doing. He's acknowledging God's greatness. He's choosing to worship and not worry. Secondly, what do you see him do? Look at verse 17. He says, incline your ear, O Lord, and hear. Open your eyes, O Lord, and see and hear all the words of Sennacherib, which he has sent to mock the living God. So now what is he doing in his time of distress? He's calling upon God to act. He's calling for action. He's saying, God, I'm praying that you will hear what this joker is saying. That's in the Greek right there, Hebrew, excuse me. Look at him. Hear what he's saying. Make sure you see this guy. Because not only, Hezekiah is kind of smart right here. Hezekiah has realized that this battle is not mine, but this battle is against him. It's against the Lord. So God, I don't know if you've seen it or heard it, but this guy down here is talking pretty junky about you. You may want to do something. Oh yeah, and by you doing something, it's going to save my tail. Yeah. But at least he realized it. And he goes to God and he says, and he understands who God is. And he lets him know, incline, please, hear what's going on. He requests action from God. Whatever it is that you're going through, whatever your it is, can I challenge you after you're praying and you're acknowledging God's greatness, and call on God to act. Call on him to act. He goes on. Verse 18, truly, O Lord, the kings of Assyria have laid waste all the nations and lands and have cast their gods into the fire. For they were no gods, but the work of men's hands, wood and stone. Therefore they were destroyed. He's saying that's why they were able to be confident and say, we conquered all these nations. Where were their gods? Because all those nations, though they thought they were being led by a god, were only being led by a piece of wood that was carved into an animal, or to a stone that was hewn out that was to make look like a creature. There was no God behind that. That's why they were easily destroyed. And so again, he's appealing to God and saying that's why they were destroyed. But it says, verse 20 though, it says, so now, O Lord our God, what does he say? Save us from his hand. Again, action. Save us. And that word save there literally means in Hebrew, it's the idea of deliver us. Deliver us. Whatever it is that you're going through, acknowledge God's greatness. Request him to act. Understand, incline your ear. Don't miss this. See it and save us. Ask him to deliver you. He goes on and he says, from the hand that all the kingdoms of the earth may know that you alone are the Lord. Third and last point I want to give you on this, acknowledge his greatness, appeal to him to act. Lastly, when you pray over your situation, don't seek it your own glory. Don't ask God to solve your problem or to fix your situation so it just betters you. What does he say here? Save us from his hand. Why? That all the kingdoms of the earth may know that you alone are the Lord. Hezekiah wasn't wanting deliverance for himself ultimately. He wanted deliverance for himself, though he would have been delivered. But he wanted it to be seen as an act of God that all nations would know that there is only one God. So as you pray for your situation, maybe it's a loss of job, and you pray for and you seek God and you acknowledge his greatness and you appeal to him to act on your behalf. If and when he does, you understand that he gave you a job not because you needed one financially, but because he wanted his glory to be revealed to all those around that were questioning, can he do it or not? It's about his glory. It's about God's glory. You see, and if you follow this story out, what you'll end up finding out in verse 33 through 40, we see what ends up happening. In chapter 37, therefore, thus says the Lord concerning the king of Assyria, because God heard it, God saw it, he sees it all. He shall not come into this city, or shoot an arrow there, or come before it with a shield, or cast up a siege mound against it. By the way he came, by the same he shall return. And he shall not come into this city, declares the Lord, for I will defend this city to save it. Whew. Could you imagine hearing that? But notice what he says. I will defend this city to save it for what? My own sake. I will do it because I am God and I will get the glory. And for the sake of my servant David. Because see, he promised David that as the Davidic king, that he would always have a remnant. And that one day one would come that would be an eternal ruler, and that is Christ. So for the nation of Israel, the southern part of Israel, Jerusalem, to be totally destroyed by this guy would mean that God had lied, and thus he ceases to still be God. Because he made a promise to David that you will always have somebody sitting on your throne. Because God is a God of promises. And he keeps them. What happens? 36, an angel of the Lord went out and struck down 185,000 camp of the Assyrians. And when people arose early in the morning, behold, these were all dead bodies. Then Sennacherib, king of Assyria, departed and returned home and lived at Nineveh. And as he was worshiping in the house of Nisroch, his god, so worshiping a false god, Adremelech and Sherazar, his sons, struck him down with the sword. And after they escaped into the land of Ariat, Esarhaddon, his son, reigned in his place. You want to mock God? I don't think I would try it. He came mocking God, and God said, you're going to return the way you came. And when you're worshiping your false God, it's in that moment that your life is going to be taken. Why? Because Hezekiah was such a faithful guy. Because Hezekiah was just this good old guy that just, some of that's true. But ultimately, because God is God, and he will always remain to be God. And he will get the glory. And so whatever it is that you're going through, maybe you've had a week like I've had. Can I challenge you? Make a list. And lay that list at the feet of the cross. Pray and acknowledge God's greatness. Pray and challenge God to act. And realize that as you pray, that it's not for just your own personal deliverance ultimately, but ultimately it's for him to get the glory and for his glory to be revealed. And you may be sitting here and saying, John, well, how did it go with your list? When we get there, we moved to Oxford, Mississippi, with about a fifth of our budget raised. It's about $15,000, if you will. Me, my wife, 3 kids, and I knew my mom was to come. So a family of 6 on $15,000. Some of y'all know what that feels like. We get into a place. Within a week or so, week and a half, Holly meets some ladies. They happen to homeschool. Check mark off. Kids got involved. Check mark off. And down and down and down. My mom was taking care of a friend of mine, got divorced, needed a place to stay. So we let him live in our house while it was for sale, while my mom lived in her space. And so he took care of her. Check mark off. One of the things I also put on there is that God would allow me to have faithfulness with my team. That happened. Check mark off. The raising of funds. I get a call the last week of August from the guy that's over FCA and says, hey, I just want to let you know you're now fully funded. To this day, I still don't know who and how it happened. Fully funded. But then there was this issue on there of a house to sell. And can I tell you, God didn't answer that prayer. And so for over 4 years in Oxford, we had a house payment in Oxford and a house payment in Jackson. And if you've ever been there, that's not a good place to be financially. And things were tight. Things weren't just easy. And I can tell you right now that there were days that I'd get angry with God. Because I don't want to paint a picture here that whatever issue, whatever problem you go through, that you write this magical list and it's like that fake prayer rug you got in the mail. I don't know if you ever gotten that, right? That you lay it underneath your pillow and pray so many things and you'll get wealth and checks and all that. I don't want to paint that picture. Because see, when we pray, prayer may not always change our circumstance, but prayer will always change you. So I don't want to paint that picture. If you make this list, and that God's going to answer all of it. Because he may, but he may not. And for over 4 years, this house did not sell. And I would be angry at God. And I'd be mad at God. I'm like, God, I don't get it. I'm being faithful. I'm doing what you've asked me to do. I've moved my family here. Finances it's a struggle for us right now. Why can't you sell this house? Just sell it. Even those questions, do you not love me? Why would you not sell it? You may not always know why. But can I tell you, I would not be standing here as your pastor if that house would have sold before those 4.5 years. Because it was during that time, my last year at Ole Miss, that I got asked to do this. endeavor, not even knowing what it looked like. And can I tell you, the one thing that was keeping us from staying and being permanently grounded and rooted in Oxford, Mississippi, being the football chaplain at Ole Miss, was I could never get this stinking house to sell. And can I tell you, without anybody that was a part of the situation knowing, Eugene making the job offer, me saying I can't give you the decision to the end of our season, to the time that an individual randomly found my email, our house was off the market, and said, hey, is your house still for sale? And none of these things were planned. Nobody knew a time. And I'm sitting out at practice one day, the week we're about to play LSU. And I had texted Eugene and I said, can I come on November 30th? That was the first Monday after the Egg Bowl. I knew I would be free. I could come up there to give you my decision. He said yes. Well, at that point, I didn't know. At that point, I texted him and he didn't give me an answer. In the meantime, I get a call from this guy that wants to buy my house that found my number, found my email on the Ole Miss website, contacted us and said, I want to buy your house. We worked out an agreement. And he said, hey, we've been given a closing date. Anybody want to take a guess on when that date was? November 30th. Probably not even 5 minutes later, I get a text from Eugene. This was the day after I texted him, and he said November 30th worked. I already knew it was going to work. I mean, it freaked me out that I dropped my phone and almost got ran over during the practice on the field. So what am I saying? I'm saying in those 4 years, it was difficult. It was hard. There was moments that I questioned, are you really for me? But at the end of the day, he had a purpose and he had a plan and he knew what he was doing. And he knows what he's doing in your life as well. Though whatever time you're going through, a wilderness experience you're going through right now, it doesn't seem that way. I'm telling you, he's got a purpose and he's got a plan. He's got a purpose and he's got a plan. I've asked Nathan to come to kind of close us out today, and then I'll be up front. But there's a song that I've heard recently that's really ministered to me, and I've asked Nathan to come and to present that to you on my behalf. Because my prayer is that it will minister to you. My prayer is that whatever you need to do right now, that you understand that this is an open altar. And if you need to come and you need to lay some things down, come and lay things down. If you need to come and speak with me, I'll stay as long as I need to. I have nowhere else to go. But I made a list and I gave it to God. And God answered those prayers. He didn't always answer them in my timing. I didn't always understand it. There was always some days I didn't really like it. But as I look out over this group, and I get a chance to see some of you, I get a pleasant surprise by Sammy. Showed up. Good guy of ours and early on, and he's come and shown up. And not to put him on the spot, but Josh and his family, met them at football practice, decided to come. And that's what gets me excited. Excited about the Thompson family that's been visiting with us, kids coming on youth. I mean, God is in the midst of doing some great things. And it's on and on and on. The Davises. And if you would have sold that house, none of this would be happening right now. So I pray that you'll allow this song to minister to your heart. I pray whatever it is you need to get right with God, that you won't leave today without doing business with Him. Because He does have a purpose for your life. And it's a good one.